Hey everybody, this is Matt. I want to say thanks so much for joining us early. We're going to give everybody else a few more minutes. We're going to start right at noon. But if you could please just locate the questions part on your control panel and let me know if you can hear me okay. I just want to make sure we're coming through loud and clear. But thanks for joining today, and we'll all talk here in about 4 minutes. All right, welcome everyone. It's me again, but we are so excited for our first webinar of the year. I want to say thanks again for everyone joining today. Some very important stuff about prioritizing your 2018 compliance plan, what you should have in place, and how to make this the best year yet. No worries about taking notes today. We're going to share a recording of today's webinar as well as the slides with you this afternoon. So be looking for that in your inbox in around probably in the next couple hours after the webinar. So we have some familiar faces for those of you that are joining us for a second or third time, some even your fifth time. It's so great to see you guys here again. But this is Mike Rosen, our co-founder and fearless leader, along with Donna Thiel, our chief compliance officer. These guys have combined, I don't want to make the wrong guess, but plenty of years of experience and a lot of knowledge in the industry, and have a lot of great things to share with you all today. A little bit about us. We are here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we love it here. We like to think of it as the healthcare capital of the world. We're a software as a service company. So what we do is help compliance officers, CFOs, procurement folks, and all sorts of people in the fields that we hope are here today on the webinar. But we help them with the easy to use software that makes their job easier and just overall makes communication easier within the company. So one thing we want to know about you guys, or now that you know about us, we want to know a little bit about you. So I'm going to launch a poll here and just tell us a little bit about who you guys are. And if you do choose other, I'll ask that you put that into your role into the questions box there, just so we can get a better understanding of the kind of people that join us on these webinars, and that way we can cater future webinars and information to the right kinds of people. So we'll let you all fill that out for 10 more seconds.
While we're doing that, good morning or good afternoon. It's Mike Rosen. Again, thanks for joining. I do want to let you know that we take pride in our presentations. We put a lot of effort and time to try to come up with what we think are topics of interest. If you have some that you would like for us to consider for 2018, we would love for you to share those with us. You can put those into the chat or email us afterwards. Last year we did over 25 webinars, all free, to like this one. And they ranged from compliance plans to deep dive on exclusions to specifically about licenses, all different kinds of things on the compliance healthcare side. So for that matter, we're open to suggestions. We do have most of the year pre-planned, but would be happy to consider some if you have some ideas. So Matt, thanks for launching that poll. It looks like quite a diverse group here. So we've got about almost 30% of you in acute care setting, a little less than 20% in post-acute. We have a couple of physician practice groups, but a lot of other. And so other looks like our DME suppliers, critical access hospitals, health systems in general. So I think you'll get a flavor. We will certainly tailor our comments to the broader scope as we do that. So when Matt said that Don and I have 4 years and he can probably count, it's not that he's limited in his ability to count. It's just we've reached that age where we just sort of put 20 plus years on our LinkedIn profile. I am a recovering lawyer. I've been in the risk mitigation service sector now for over 20 years, mostly in the pre-employment background screening and now medical related ongoing monitoring. Donna actually grew up in healthcare. She has, prior to this, to joining us as compliance officer a couple of years ago, she spent her whole entire career with extended care and grew up from starting at administrative level all the way up to ultimately the chief compliance officer of a very large national long-term care provider, and has a really broad perspective because toward the end of her tenure, the company Extended Care actually was entering into a CIA, which she negotiated with the OIG and had to adjust their compliance plan as a result. So any comments that she can throw in of where things change when the rules change with the CIA, I think would be of benefit. So today we've got a lot to cover, and what we're basically going to break it into is, for those of you for whom this is either your first introduction to a compliance plan or certainly a pro, we will cover both. But what is a compliance plan from the vernacular that we're talking about here, why it matters, and how the OIG views it, which really is probably what most of us are most concerned. Good news and bad news of a compliance plan. If you don't have one, you won't breach it. But if you don't have one, you're not in good governance, and certainly not in really compliance with the best practice today. If you do have one, it needs to be something that you follow. And simply putting words on paper or copying something from another organization can really sting you when you are put to the test as to, oh, you said you're going to do this, how are you doing it? And so Donna will address that. For those of you who really are new to it and coming up with one, we'll share with you maybe thoughts on how to begin organizing and who are the stakeholders for that, how you finalize, and certainly I think number 4 we'll spend some time on, because updating your plan needs to occur throughout the year. These things are not just put on the shelf and apply 5 years later. And then what actions you can take. So I feel hopefully that will drive the discussions today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Donna. Donna, what is a compliance plan?
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Matt. And as Matt and Mike both said, thank you all for joining us in 2018. We're excited about another great year of learning from you, and hopefully us sharing a few nuggets of wisdom. As Mike said, we've both been around a really long time, and thank you, Matt, for not actually quantifying how many years that's been. So Matt, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide, and let's talk about a compliance plan. I think first and foremost, it's written, right? It's not just something that's swirling around in your head about how you're going to implement compliance in your organization. I will also say there is absolutely no perfect template. If you went out and Googled compliance plans, you'll see compliance plans that are every different size and shape. So it's really important that your compliance plan looks like your organization. So it's something that you're comfortable with, your leadership is comfortable with, and it really reflects the culture and the compliance program that's happening in your organization. So to kind of just quickly bullet it, it really is a picture of the structure of your compliance program. It might outline if you have a compliance committee at your board level, or do you have a compliance committee of senior leadership? What does your internal team look like in compliance? So really kind of outlines that structure. It also, of course, talks about the 7 elements of a compliance program. And we're going to go through all of these, so don't worry. This is just kind of a quick list. But how does your organization manage or oversee the 7 elements of a compliance program? It gives you an opportunity to really also identify the risks that are unique to your organization, unique to your particular healthcare industry, the things that are of high priority in your organization. It also gives you an opportunity to spell out why, if the OIG or the Department of Justice or someone was looking at you as an organization, what controls you have in place so that perhaps they won't dig too much deeper. So let's dive in a little bit more into this compliance plan. Matt, go ahead. Thank you. So why is a compliance plan necessary? Well, Mike alluded to it a little bit, but the OIG expects us to have a compliance plan. It doesn't think that it's okay to have it just sitting on the shelf. And we're going to talk about that more as the hour goes on. So this compliance plan is really that written roadmap, right? It's outlining your risks. It's outlining the mitigation strategies that you have. It outlines communication and training. It's really a roadmap to help all of you stay on track with the goals of your compliance program. It sets clear objectives to meet regulatory requirements. What does that really mean? Well, in my mind, what that means is that you as an organization, you as a compliance officer, someone in the compliance team, recognizes and understands the regulatory requirements that relate to your particular setting. So you're going to talk about some of the regulatory risks for your organization as part of your plan. And then it talks about, again, your commitment, right? What are we doing to make sure that as an organization, we stay in compliance? It gives you an opportunity to really define some of your next steps or the actions that you're doing. And this last one enables you to identify risk. Might sound a little peculiar in this particular place, but I don't know about you, but in my past life, there were times where I struggled with getting other folks to be comfortable and transparent in identifying risks. But we know that part of the compliance program, and specifically in your compliance plan, that it's really important that compliance monitors the highest risks of the organization, right? We don't own them. We're not responsible for all the solutioning, but really making sure that we're monitoring and that corrective actions and things that are supposed to happen are happening. So sometimes just by having it as part of your compliance plan, it gives you a little bit more leverage perhaps, or another opportunity, another way to talk to people about why it's so important to be transparent about risks that they're seeing within their particular area of responsibility.
And Donna, let me add two things if I can here on that. First of all, it's really important, and we will address this coming up shortly, that you get the right stakeholders at the table. If you're thinking as the compliance officer in charge there of the compliance program or plan, that all this is on your shoulders and then everyone else will simply follow it, I think you're walking into it with an unrealistic expectation. There really should be representatives from IT, security, from the HIPAA standpoints, from operational, there are legal components to this, billing, all of which need to be to put in input. We'll address that. But I want to also share with you that from a legal perspective, there is the federal sentencing guidelines that the Department of Justice uses when pursuing a false claim or other type of fraud action against the corporation. The federal sentencing guidelines is what the Department of Justice and the judges use for the final sentencing or penalties, if you will. When that is applied, if you have what is considered an effective compliance program, by the end of today, you'll know what that means. You are entitled under the federal sentencing guidelines to up to 85% reduction in the penalties simply for having one. It's okay if you make a mistake, says the federal government, as long as you documented, did your best, tried, it wasn't intentional, but the mistake occurred, you corrected it, you'll have up to 85% reduction in the type of penalties. So there's a lot of reasons in addition to just the obvious best practice to have a compliance plan.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, Matt, why don't we go to the next slide? So Matt, take it away.
Sure, just we have a couple more polling questions for you guys this session here, and I'm about to launch this just so we can get a feel for where you are. No shame here. We're just curious to if you currently have a plan, if not, or if you're not even aware, if there might be a plan going on behind your back that you're not sure of yet.
All right, very good. We got good participation. So we're right at about 90% yes, 10% no. That's very typical for what we see. For those of you who do not have one or are eager to find out how best to create one, some of this will be very relevant to you, and we're happy to follow up with you if we can assist in any way. That's not the business that we're in, but we can certainly help with resources and guidelines. For those of you who do have it, I think you're going to hopefully validate what you've done along the way, but maybe learn some things that you could update and enhance along the way. So with that, Donna, assuming you're one of the 10%, what is the compliance program basics that need to be covered?
You bet. And just to reassure all of you at 89% who already have a plan, I think as we go through today, there'll be some highlights and opportunities for us to look at what our current plans are as well. So where to begin? And I don't think this is specific to just those who don't have a plan. I think some of us may have, over the course of our careers, inherited other compliance plans that were written, or our compliance plan that was written by our predecessor or someone else in the organization. So all of these things, I think you can look at whether you're updating your plan or if you're starting from scratch. So of course, like we talked about at the very beginning, there's 7 elements of a compliance plan, of compliance program, excuse me. We're not going to go through all 7 of these. I think most of us recognize that there's 7 elements. We're familiar with them. If not, they're right here. They'll be a great guide for you. On the other half of the slide, we talk about some possible risk areas. And this really kind of delves into what Mike was talking about, that compliance isn't a one-person area of responsibility, right? It's a whole organization. The first bullet is quality of care. And if you have monitored recent settlements, or not even recent, in the last few years, focus areas of the OIG, oftentimes they're talking about quality of care issues and how important it is that quality is a big piece of the compliance program and responsibilities for, kind of that monitoring. So I think that's a great area to look at. Obviously, as we're looking at employee and vendor screening, that's our provider trust. That's our sweet spot. That's what we do best. And certainly something that all of you, I'm sure, recognize is very important. And just because I'm kind of a statistics person, for your own just knowledge, last year, 2017, the average OIG penalty for employing an excluded person was just about $129,000. So needless to say, probably something that should be in your compliance plan. Billing and coding, we all know the importance of making sure that we have good, clean claims for the things that we're billing. Cost reports, kickbacks and inducements, self-referrals. We're going to talk about those particular regulations as we go through this presentation, but certainly an important area in your compliance plan. HIPAA, we could do a whole session or multiple sessions on HIPAA, right? What kind of controls? Maybe in your compliance plan, you would talk about breach reporting and that process, how as an organization, or training relative to HIPAA. Documentation, we all know the old adage, right? If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So how are you making sure, not only from a clinical perspective, that we have good documentation to support the treatment and care that was provided, but also yourself, right? How are we documenting the good compliance investigations that we're conducting and closing those loops? So documentation is really important across the organization. Patient rights, medical necessity, again, all areas that we're very familiar with, but things maybe to think about including in your compliance plan. Now, where do we go for some help? Now, I don't think I said it at the beginning, but quite honestly, Google is a great place to just look at other people's compliance plans. It can't be cut and paste. I can guarantee you it can't be something that looks like every other organization's compliance plans, right? They need to be unique to you. But if you've never done this and you just don't know where to start, go to the Healthcare Compliance Association. If you're a member of HCCA, check out some of their resources. There's many organizations that do have their compliance plans posted. Just take a peek at them. But then specifically, as you're trying to now delve into content for your compliance plan, the OIG guidance and the OIG work plan are really important. Now, interesting, and I'm sure all of you know this, that the OIG work plan used to be updated on an annual basis, right? In October, we all were used to getting their work plan, and that kind of drove the updating of our own internal compliance plans because the OIG was giving us all this great new information. Well, now they're coming out with monthly updates. So I would just put that in the back of your mind because I'm going to talk about it a little bit later about the frequency of updating your plan. Mike mentioned the federal sentencing guidelines, so I won't talk about that more, but keep that in mind when you're perhaps talking to folks who aren't that familiar with the penalties for not following all the rules. The federal sentencing guidelines are a great resource when you're trying to encourage people to do the right thing. And then we're talking here, HIPAA, Stark, false claims, anti-kickback. All of these regulations should be at least addressed in your compliance plan. You may use them as a, here's how this particular regulation applies to our segment or to our company as a whole. But those are areas where you should definitely be making sure that you're up to speed on the latest and greatest of these federal regulations. Always look at OIG settlements, the Department of Justice strike force activities, areas of focus. If I say this almost every webinar, I think, but if you haven't gone to the OIG website and the DOJ website and signed up for their free email alerts, please do so. You'll find so much great information. You'll have it, as soon as it comes out of the government's mouth, you'll have the latest information on their settlements or areas of focus. So I found those to be extremely helpful. And then the last one is whistleblowers. Now, interesting, at least it was interesting to me, the DOJ did a press release at the end of the year. I think it was right before Christmas, like December 20 something. They came out with their fiscal year 2017 statistics. So remember, the government's fiscal year is different than a calendar year. So they indicated that for the fiscal year 2017, they had $3.7 billion of recovery. So $3.7 billion. $3.4 billion of that was from whistleblowers, from key TAM actions specifically related to false claims. So if you think about that, that's 92%, if I did my math right. 92% of the 2017 recoupment was based on a whistleblower, a key tam, someone from within an organization who called the government, most likely because they weren't being satisfied with the service that we were providing them within that organization. So it's really important as you're looking at resources, pay attention to that. All right, Matt, let's go ahead to the next one. So the next slide talks about internal resources. So now we kind of know the state of the state, if you will, related to the federal government and their initiatives. And now we need to look internal. And as Mike said, right, it's everybody. So what are the changing strategic focus areas in your organization? We know that in healthcare right now, every day something's changing. And because something's changing at a federal or state level, it means that internally we need to make changes too. So you need to be making sure that your compliance program and your compliance plan is agile enough to be updated and focusing on any changing initiatives within the organization. Make sure you're paying attention to any compliance policies that are being updated or changed or added. That's a good area, good place to look at. Obviously, your compliance committee, right? What are you hearing from the compliance committee related to things that they want to see changed? Audit outcomes, right? We should always be looking to improve. So what did we see last year on all those things that we are auditing and monitoring? Are there new things that we need to focus on? And those hotline call trends, we just talked about whistleblowers and key tam actions. Keep in mind, at least from my perspective, we oftentimes look at hotline metrics for the category, the type of call, or which particular location. If you're a multi, if you're like my organization had about 200 nursing homes. So we were used to looking at which call, which location did we get the most, or were they in a particular state or region? But you should also be looking at where am I getting zero, or am I getting enough calls? Because if you're not, that means that people are probably afraid to call. So look at that. And then compliance metrics. You might not have a dashboard, you might have Excel spreadsheets, you might just be monitoring things, but make sure that the metrics that you feel are important are built into your compliance plan.
Donna, before we go to our last poll question, I wanted to comment back on the whistleblower that we referenced, which really could be in and of itself its own webinar. But keep in mind, a whistleblower is a current or former employee, right? So they're right there in your organization or were in your organization. And the majority of them, there are some professional whistleblowers who, believe it or not, that's their job, is to go to companies looking for problems so they can try to make money. But for the other 98% of the people that are whistleblowers, when you look at the cases, they actually tried to do the right thing, but a lot of them didn't know what the company stood for. And as Donna said at the beginning, this becomes your culture. It should be your culture. People should be able to know where the compliance plan is. They should be trained on it. It should be something that is, from the top down. Your CEO, hopefully, is living and speaking and being part of that culture so that people feel comfortable that the company's trying to do the right thing. If that's the case and they feel that they've been listened to and they understand what the mission of the company is and where they can go to self-disclose something, you won't hopefully find yourself in a whistleblower action where they chose instead to go to the feds or a plaintiff's lawyer and have that whole circus encompass what really could have been resolved had this been a safe place for them to go and they knew exactly where to report it. So I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that whistleblower. And obviously, the whistleblowers can retain up to a third of the settlement amount or the amount that ultimately the company's held liable for. So there is pecuniary reasons they'll go after it, but most of them really wanted to try to do the right thing in-house. Okay, on the polling question. Sorry, we have one more slide. I apologize. Donna, you were talking about internal resources and gathering people there.
Right, and I think Mike mentioned this at the very beginning as well. And I think I've said it too, it's really important that this isn't a singular area of focus, right? It's everyone in your organization. And these are just a few specific, examples, but obviously your compliance committee, if you're lucky enough to have a compliance committee, you'd be gathering information and feedback. Your leadership team, right? They're the ones driving the business. So making sure that you're understanding what's important to all of them and areas of risk. You may or may not have an internal audit department. Maybe you have auditors within the compliance team. Maybe you have just an internal auditor, but making sure that you're talking with them and understanding what they're seeing as they're conducting their audits. Operations, of course, right? What are the latest and greatest things that we're doing to improve quality, improve revenue, all of the things that are high priorities in the organization. Billing, administration, or finance, but billing, really making sure that you have an understanding where we stand maybe with the 60-day overpayment process, and what's your claim submission, what kind of checks and balances do you have in your billing systems. Clinical, we talked about quality of care and how important that is. And then IT, right? Whether it's security relative to HIPAA, whether it's just new EMRs. We know in 2017, the OIG had their first settlement with an electronic health record software company. So that's on top of mind as well. So looking at all of those and talking to those folks and really understanding their risks and their controls will be really important as you build your compliance plan. So go ahead, let's do that next polling question.
Very good. And let me remind you that we are recording this for you to be able to replay, or if someone has missed it and wants to listen to it, that's fine. You can share it with other colleagues. And Matt will send you a copy of that with the PowerPoint. But also we encourage you to ask questions along the way, and we will get to them as they come in. So feel free to do so. Our poll question here is, how often do you update your compliance plan? Assuming you're one of the 90%, 89% that has one. Are you updating these quarterly, biannually, or annually? Or I guess there could be never, but let's assume that's not the case. If you will, as best you can answer that or guesstimate, that'd be great. We'll go about 5 more seconds to get everybody to participate. And Matt, let's close the poll. All right, great. So about a little less than 15% do it on a quarterly basis, which is very nice and certainly not required, but a good idea. Biannually, 6%. Most of you are doing it annually, and maybe a third of you are not sure, and that's fine. But something worth finding out about. There is no requirement by law to update it annually or even more often. But by far best practice, because of what Donna said, the work plan changes on a monthly basis now. Used to be annual. New cases come out that you need to pivot based on actions that the Department of Justice has sought against other companies, and just good practice is why it should be done at least on an annual basis. So Donna, now that we know that's kind of what the marketplace here is, let's talk about rounding out, finalizing the plan, and some other tidbits here for the group.
Great, thanks, Mike. Matt, why don't you go ahead to the next slide? So as you're finalizing your plan, and I struggled with, is it finalizing, is it writing it, is it preparing it? So use whatever words you want, but kind of as you're compiling it, putting it all together, here's just some thoughts, I guess. First and foremost, the initial time, or that first time it's written, it is usually extremely detailed. So I know from past experience that I've been part of compliance plans that are, 30 pages. I've also seen them 50 or 60 pages. Certainly I've seen some that are 5 or 6 pages. So as I said at the beginning, right, there's no perfect template. It's what matches your culture and your program. But generally speaking, that very first plan is pretty detailed. It contains an overview of your compliance program. So it's really spelling out what you as an organization are doing to ensure compliance and a culture of compliance. So it'll have 7 elements, but it'll also have specific probably communication related to the board and communication related to your compliance committee, maybe frequency of meetings, that sort of thing. It'll have regulatory and internal risks. So what do I mean by that? Oftentimes what I've seen is that an organization will look at the specific regulations that apply to them, and they want to delineate the requirement in a pretty short way, but then talk about the things that they're doing in their organization to ensure compliance. It may be a statement that says, based on our experience in monitoring this, we do not feel at this time that we have any concerns. However, we'll continue to be aware of our responsibilities. Probably not exactly how you would write that, but it could be, short and sweet. But there may be other regulations that are very complicated and are very important or critical to your operations that you'll really want to spell out the mitigation strategies that you relating to regulatory requirements. Keep in mind, if and when, or maybe we should just say if the OIG or
So I think we're having technical issues. We've lost Donna's audio, but as we get her back on, I did want to point out something that Donna was referencing, and actually Sherry has asked a good question. Sherry was talking about being on the compliance audit part of her organization, and
these risks.
Oh, there you are, Donna. We lost you. I'm so sorry. We lost you for maybe about 40 seconds. Let me finish one comment I was filling in while you come back. Sherry had asked a question about, as she's updating her work plan, what are best recommendations to implement some of the monthly OIG guidelines or work plan statements? And let me take an early stab, and you can add to that, Donna. We blog about those, and you're welcome to use us as your resource for it if you don't want to go directly to the OIG. But a lot of those may not apply. They have to do with opioid things they're working on or other areas. And when they're updating it, they're saying these are areas of focus. They're not issuing, if it's a guidance, it's something new that comes out, you won't see it through the work plan. It'll actually be a separate bulletin. They did a bulletin in 2013 on the effect of exclusions, by way of example, and it spent about 30 pages talking about all the questions they've been receiving over time. So a bulletin is going to be something that should rise to the occasion of changing your plan, but the work plan itself will outline areas of focus that the OIG is on, not something that they've necessarily changed each month. So I hope that addresses, Sherry, your question there. And Donna, we lost you, and I apologize, probably about 30 seconds ago.
Sorry about that. My microphone looked like it was at all green, so I apologize. So did we get very far in the plan elements before?
Yes, you were wrapping up about the last bullet point contains mitigation efforts.
Okay, perfect. Well, I apologize, everyone. I am in South Carolina today, not in the office, so I'm doing this remote, so I apologize. So the last one is the mitigation strategies. Equally as important as identifying the risks is certainly making sure that you're taking credit for the great things that you're doing in your organization. And as I said, but you might not have heard me, this is certainly an important component if the OIG, the DOJ, or any other third party comes to your organization. You want to be able to show them your knowledge, your culture, your self-identification of risks, and what you're doing as an organization to mitigate these areas. So all of that should go in your plan. So Matt, let's go to the next slide. So training to me is a really important component of a good culture, a good compliance culture. So I personally think you should include in your compliance plan something about your training strategy, how you're training your folks on an annual basis. Are you training your board of directors? What do new folks have to, or what that they have to, but what kind of education do you give to new employees and new board members? What about at-risk areas? So as you're going through the year and you're doing all the auditing and monitoring, are you ever changing and updating your education, right? Because self-identification is all about finding it and resolving it. So again, I think training is a really important part. And then Mike was just talking about the OIG work plan is updated monthly now. So as new issues are coming up, are you addressing those? Are you updating your education? Perhaps put something in there, or consider it at least in your training plan. And then do you do any sort of monthly communications or newsletters? Again, making sure that you're in your compliance plan, you have some sort of a training strategy, I think is really important.
Yeah, Donna, one thing I've heard you say in other training sessions that I thought was a really good piece of advice, if you're doing a spot check as a compliance officer and you're walking through one of your facilities or a floor or whatever, and if you just popped over to anyone's desk and said, hey, what's our compliance hotline number? Where would you go if you had a question? And if they can't answer it, it's a good little test that maybe your training's not effective, because that's the most basic thing that either they should have posted in front of them and delivered by your department, or at least know off the top of their head. You're not expecting them to know how to code ICD-10 properly, but you do expect on the very basic level that they know where that resource is. So you can do things along the way to test your training. And I thought that was a good advice you've given before.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, absolutely. We had a bright pink poster, compliance hotline poster, that we posted in all of our break rooms for all of our employees. And so when I visited our locations, I actually wore pink most of the time to try to correlate the compliance poster and compliance program and myself into that. So might be silly, but for whatever reason, it seemed to work. So excellent suggestion. The other thing that I would want to talk about just briefly is including your audit plan. It doesn't have to be every single component of the audit plan, but the fact that you have an audit plan. And obviously, if you don't have an audit plan, you wouldn't reference it. But most organizations have some sort of document or program, or even if it's not written but should be written, a process that they follow relative to auditing. So who oversees it? How is it done? What do we do with the information? I think all of those things will really help you from an overall compliance culture. And so I think it's great to put it in your compliance plan and take credit for the fact that you have an organization-wide self-identification program.
Hey, Donna, Jade has asked a really timely question. If your board members are not recipients of patient-level data, do you still need to train them on the compliance plan or even privacy issues?
I apologize, Mike. You broke up when you were asking the question, so I didn't hear it.
Jade asked, if your board members are not recipients of patient-level data, do you still need to train them on that and the privacy-related issues? And Jade, I'll start that from a legal standpoint. The answer is yes. Your board should be very familiar with your entire compliance plan. And there have been some cases of late, by the way, that hold members of the executive team and or board of directors personally liable for fraud that went on under their watch. And so we would recommend that and would probably hope that your compliance committee on the board allows you maybe 10 minutes each board meeting to update them on things you're seeing, things you're doing to be proactive. But training your board on, and there's actually a great OIG resource on board training that I would suggest you take a look at on their website. They did a very big piece on this about 2 years ago that even had some PowerPoint slides on how to approach and train your board members. So very, very good question on that. Donna, we got you back because I'm not hearing you.
Yep, I'm back. I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on. So thank you for answering those questions.
All right, we're going to go to the next slide.
Perfect. All right, so at this point, you have gathered all sorts of information, you've talked to all sorts of folks, and I think you're at a point now to really ask yourself, is your compliance plan comprehensive? Do I have all the right things? So here are just some questions and some suggestions that I would have as you're finalizing your plan. Does it really outline how your program detects and prevents, fraud, waste, and abuse? If the OIG looked at it, would they consider it comprehensive? Meaning it's not just on a shelf. As Mike said, we talk to folks, we make sure that they understand what's going on. We're continuously auditing and monitoring our outcomes. Would you be able to prove it? And I know that sounds like, oh, why would I have to prove it? But from past experience, we definitely have to improve it, or prove it, I should say, and improve it. But if there's ever a government investigation, you have to be able to prove that you have an effective compliance program and people understand what compliance means. Did you get valuable feedback, right? Did you talk to folks? Did they actually give you good information, and are you feeling comfortable with the program? And then is your plan aligned? Does it recognize operational risk? Are you where you need to be with the changing dynamics in your company? And at some point, you'll need to ask yourself, are your outcomes improving, right? We want to self-identify, we want to continue to improve, that sort of thing. So right off the bat, when you're first writing it, you can't answer that question. But as you're updating your plan, you would want to be asking yourself if you're seeing improvement in the metrics and the things that you're monitoring as a compliance program.
Yeah, and Donna, actually, Raynetta is representing, I think, we have a variety of size clients on this call, obviously very large organizations and some smaller. And so her question is, if you have a small organization, can the compliance officer also conduct your audit, or is there a conflict there?
I think that's with a small organization, I think you have to look at the separation of duties and figure out who's doing what. So if you're saying, can I audit the effectiveness of the compliance program, I would suggest that you would want others in your organization to help you write good questions. How are you doing that? Are you going out into the field? Are you doing surveys? You know, what are you doing to audit the compliance program? If you're talking about other areas within the organization, then by all means, yes, you can do that. So I think it's really just making sure that you set up an objective process, and certainly that no one would ever feel intimidated by any of the questions if it is you as the compliance person asking those sorts of questions.
Yeah, and Raynetta, I would also add, it's a great question. I would also add that, you know, when you have an effective compliance program, the first element is you have to have a compliance officer. But one of the things that the OIG has made abundantly clear, and the American Bar Association happens to agree, by the way, is that it used to be that the compliance officer would typically report to the general counsel, but that is actually a no-no. So if you are still under that structure, it should be revised. And that's one of the early things that the OIG looks at. The compliance officer should be, and this is a pat on the back to all of you who have a difficult job and feel probably unloved most of the time, unwanted, but when you walk down the halls for sure. But the compliance officer is an extremely important role in the eyes of the OIG, should be and legally needs to be separated from the general counsel because there's different interests. Having served as general counsel myself, I can tell you my job is to defend the company, which may be at odds against the individuals that created fraud within the company. And we may be at odds in those situations, and that's why they need to be separate. You should not be stifled in any way because of the fear that you're reporting to a legal officer. So from that perspective, Raynetta, there's nothing illegal with having the compliance officer also perform the audit, but always a separate set of eyes is a good idea because people might see things differently than you, and then you get a different perspective. Before we move on to in the last 10 minutes here, Tina wanted to share a resource, and she says that the New York office of the Medicare, the OIG, the New York OMIG, offers a really valuable compliance program self-assessment tool that people in other states can use. So we'll go find that, or Tina, if you want to email that to us, we'll include it in what we send out. And thanks for sharing that resource.
Excellent, thanks. And New York, you can always count on New York. Their Medicaid agency is always ahead of the game. So definitely a great resource. So moving on is really now, is it approved? Different organizations, again, size and shape, have different processes. Some organizations have a very specific compliance plan review process where it's presented to the board has to approve it. Others just have a leadership team that they share it with, and everybody agrees that these are the areas of focus, or the compliance committee. So I think it's important, though, to make sure that this document isn't just a document, that it's being shared with everyone, that you're getting buy-in from your leadership, that this is where we're going to focus our compliance efforts in the coming year if you're doing it on an annual basis. So now the big question, right? Updating. We asked you, do you do it annually, biannually, monthly? How often do you do it? As Mike said, there's really no right answer, but I would remind us now that the OIG work plan is being updated monthly. Oftentimes the OIG uses these kind of behavior changes that they make as information for us to kind of follow and take their lead on things. So certainly, I don't know that that's their expectation, but I would just remind us all that they're updating theirs monthly. So there's probably some hint involved in that. So as I'm looking at my plan and I'm looking back at whether or not I should update it, I want to look at my internal risk assessment process. Are my risks changing? Are there any new big changing business objectives, right? Is there a new strategic initiative in my company that we think we want to add to the compliance plan or add some monitoring? Of course, external factors, right? Are there regulatory changes? Is the government focusing on an area more specifically than they have in the past? And so therefore, I need to change information that's in my compliance plan. We talked about the OIG work plan being updated every month. As Mike said, it's much smaller, different pieces. Sometimes there might be 2 or 3 things that relate to your particular industry. Other times, none of them apply, but still good to be aware of and monitoring. And then last but not least, what about you and your compliance, your processes? Have you done anything differently? Again, a big component of this compliance plan is getting credit, taking credit for the really great things that you're doing. So make sure that as your compliance plan and your compliance program is growing, you should make sure that your plan is accurately reflecting the growth and the great things that you're doing. So which areas do I address? We talked about this before. Every organization is unique and different. There's no one right answer, but you've built this plan, you have all of this information, and how do I decide exactly what it is that I should be focusing on? Prioritize your risks. That, in my opinion, is absolutely key and number one. Make sure you understand what are the highest risks, and therefore you're monitoring and auditing for those highest risk areas. We talked about this many times. It's not in a vacuum, right? It's with your leadership team, making sure that you're all communicating about what's most important. Look at your outcomes and your metrics. If you've been monitoring something for a year or 2 years and your metrics are improving, and now they're really not at a risk level anymore, well, maybe it's time to switch out your metrics. Maybe there's different metrics that you should be monitoring because your organization has really focused on a few things, improved them, and now you can move on to some other problem areas. And of course, we've talked about this a lot, making sure that you're staying current with any OIG guidance, settlements, enforcement actions, whatever the case may be, state and federal. Always make sure that you're familiar with what's happening around you. So take action. So look at your plan and ask yourself, so today, if I want to go back and I want to look at my plan and I want to ask myself, is it on the shelf and it hasn't been looked at in 5 years, or is it really a good plan? These are some questions that I would ask myself. Does it represent the processes, the things that you do in your organization to prevent and detect violations, right? Reporting them. All of those things are so important. Is it current? Does it look at your current risks? Does it have an audit plan? Did you even consider putting that in it when it was written the first time? Does it have a training plan? We talked about how important I think training is. So did you include that in your plan? Or was that something managed by somebody else and so you didn't feel a need? That's a personal preference, right? That's not anything that has to be there. That's just a me, something that I think is important to put in the plan. Ask yourself, look, see, can you remember? Can you find it? When was the last time it was updated? If nobody knows the answer to that, you don't know the answer to that, probably it means you probably should be updating it now. And when it's the last time you actually talked about it with the committee, with your leadership, with the folks around you, I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and Donna, let me just put a plug in again for all of you on this call. You need to raise your hand, shout out from the rooftops. You need to be on the quarterly, if not monthly, board meeting agenda for at least 10 minutes. You deserve it, they need it, and it's time for the compliance committee to be up, to be a part of. If I were, I know at my own company, we have a compliance update, but if I were running a hospital or some type of healthcare facility, that would be on my agenda each time to know in 10 minutes or less what's going on, what are my issues, do we need to have a separate breakout session? And you need to raise your hand for that if that's not something that currently exists in your organization.
Absolutely. We have to fight for ourselves, right? Be our own advocates. And as I said, communication is really the key. we write these plans, we spend so much time and energy, and then oftentimes they do just kind of sit on the shelf waiting for the next update. So make sure that everyone knows about your compliance plan, your leadership, your board, your compliance committee, that people really realize that there's a culture of compliance and that we've written it down to help everyone understand it. Talk about the progress. We talk about the importance of acknowledging or taking credit for the good things that we do. So make sure that you're really continuously communicating progress and improvement. When you update the plan, tell people that you've updated the plan. Make sure that that's part of your routine conversations, and make sure that you're keeping your compliance committee current at all times to everything that's in your compliance plan.
So this one, I think we've covered reviewing, keeping it current, look for regulations and all that kind of stuff. I hope that this last slide here maybe gives you a little bit of simplicity for everything we just talked about. Really to have an effective compliance plan, you need to make sure you're monitoring multiple things, right? Not just your employees and vendors, but your policies, your as it pertains to billing and all the patient care you're doing. You need to modify if you find things that need to change, right? Pivoting is the key. The OIG has been very open about, they understand nobody can be perfect. And as long as you are yourself monitoring it and figuring it out, adjusting, modifying what needs to do to improve, that's where they come down less heavy or at all on your organization. It is when they have to call you through an audit and say, we've discovered that you've been overbilling for 2 years. We've gotten 100 complaints from nursing home patients because they're not going through your hotline, they're coming to us. And here we are and that's the kind of things you see where they're raiding companies, they're pulling documents, the FBI or others get involved. It's not a place to be. So hopefully what we've been able to outline for you gives you a feel for what is an effective plan, what you should be doing to keep that updated, and we've been able to answer some questions along the way. Is there any questions that weren't addressed? I know we're getting one about Donna. They would like to see a picture of you in your pink dress and a copy of more importantly, the poster. So if you could get a copy of the poster, you have eager ears and eyes looking for that.
I bet we can probably make that happen.
Okay.
Minus the pink clothes. I don't know about that. I don't know.
That's very effective. Well, as we respect your time and said at the top of the hour, we don't want to abuse that. We do have, for your viewing pleasure, we do hope that you'll find some of our materials helpful. We've got 3 or 4 deep dive guide books that we put out that are not sales pitch at all. They're there to help educate you. The most recent of which is on healthcare license monitoring. Hope you find that of interest. If you found this to be of interest, please share it with others. You're welcome, and please do subscribe to our free blog. We take a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of historical things there, and at least on a weekly basis, something new coming out to keep you apprised. We're very active in social media and hope that you'll follow us there, and that we'll hear or see you on future webinars, which we do on a monthly basis, and Matt will be sure to let you know what the upcoming ones are for February, March, and April. If Provider Trust can help you in any way, shape, or form, we are in the exclusion monitoring, license, and sanction verification business, and have a software that helps people do that with dashboards and proactive notifications. We do all the matching so you don't have to. But we're not going to sell you. We just want to let you know what we're out there doing. If you're interested, though, we can provide you with access to a demo of our service, or if nothing else, follow up to the questions that you wanted to ask or didn't feel you got a chance to get enough detail on. From the legal perspective, happy to do so. From the true life, in your shoes compliance officer, that would definitely be Donna. And I mentioned at the beginning we didn't get a chance to talk, but really, there are a ton of the rules that change if you're under a corporate integrity agreement, as her previous company was. And you don't get the option of doing some of these things. They will force a very detailed rewrite of your compliance plan and oversight for the next typically 5 years. So putting this into action day one and ahead of the curve is much less painful than going through a rewrite of the entire thing with a monitor on your shoulder. And Donna could go through what that's like if you want to speak with her individually. We'll give you our contact information. No other questions really coming in, Matt. I think probably the best thing is thank you for your time, and hope that this was instructive, helpful, and hope that we can see you at future webinars and events at Provider Trust. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you. I apologize for the technical problems today. Have a great day, everyone.